Jake was the kind of man who made people stop and stare. He was tall, well-dressed, and carried himself with a confidence that only came from growing up in unimaginable wealth. His family had been rich for generations and everyone in the city knew their name. The Walkers owned businesses, properties, and everything in between. If there was something worth having, Jake already owned it. From a young age, Jake was taught that he could have anything he wanted. He wore clothes tailored abroad, ate meals prepared by the best chefs, and attended the most prestigious schools. His parents gave him everything, except perhaps the one thing money couldn't buy: humility. Jake's view of the world was shaped by his privilege. He believed everyone wanted something from him, especially women. To Jake, love was a transaction. He thought women only pretended to care about him so they could enjoy his money and status. This belief made him treat women poorly. He would charm them, date them briefly, and then discard them like old toys when he got bored. One night, at a party in his mansion, two women he had been dating showed up uninvited. A loud argument broke out as the women confronted Jake. One accused him of lying, while the other demanded to know why he had ignored her calls. Jake, instead of apologizing or calming the situation, smirked. He didn't try to stop the fight. Instead, he grabbed his car keys, walked out to his shiny black sports car, and drove off, leaving the chaos behind. This was Jake's life, shallow and self-centered. While he enjoyed the luxury his money brought, he felt something was missing. Still, he pushed the thought aside, convincing himself he didn't need love or deep connections. Years passed and Jake remained the same. His friends would tease him about his endless string of girlfriends, asking when he would finally settle down. At first, Jake laughed it off, but over time the question started to bother him. He began to realize he didn't want to spend the rest of his life alone. But if he was going to marry, Jake had one condition. His wife had to be a virgin. Jake's reasoning was rooted in his need for control and pride. He wanted someone untouched, someone he could claim as his alone. To him, it was a way to ensure his wife wasn't after his money or status. It was a twisted idea, but Jake believed it wholeheartedly. He started searching for the perfect woman. But the more he looked, the more frustrated he became. Most of the women he met didn't meet his standards. Some lied about their pasts, while others didn't even try to hide their intentions. Jake grew bitter and almost gave up. That's when a thought struck him. Perhaps he needed to look somewhere completely different. One evening, while scrolling through his phone, Jake came across a post about a church service. The image showed a bright, welcoming congregation with people smiling and praying together. Jake had never been a religious man, but something about the idea intrigued him. Church girls, he thought. They're bound to be pure. The next Sunday, Jake put on a modest suit, well, modest by his standards, and walked into a church for the first time in years. The atmosphere was nothing like he expected. People greeted him warmly and the songs were uplifting. Jake, who was used to people wanting something from him, found the genuine kindness refreshing. But not everyone welcomed him without suspicion. Some members of the congregation recognized Jake's face from the tabloids. They whispered among themselves, questioning why someone like him was in their church. Others guessed he might be trying to turn over a new leaf. Jake didn't care what they thought. He had a goal and he was determined to achieve it. Over the next few weeks, Jake started attending services regularly. He joined prayer meetings and even volunteered for small tasks around the church. Though his motives weren't entirely pure, he found himself drawn to the sense of community. For the first time in years, Jake felt like he belonged somewhere. And then one evening during a prayer meeting, he saw her. She was sitting in the front row, her head bowed in prayer. Her long, dark hair framed her delicate face, and her eyes sparkled when she looked up. Jake couldn't take his eyes off her. She was beautiful in a way that felt almost otherworldly. Unlike the women he had dated before, there was something pure and genuine about her. After the meeting, Jake asked one of the church elders about her. "That's Samantha," the elder said. "She's been part of this church for years. A kind soul and very devoted." Jake's interest grew. He decided to find out more about Samantha. He discreetly asked around, learning about her background, her habits, and her reputation. Everything he heard only made him more intrigued. Samantha was kind, intelligent, and private. No one seemed to have anything bad to say about her. But Samantha wasn't naive. She noticed Jake's growing interest. One evening, after another church event, she approached him directly. "I hear you've been asking about me," she said with a soft smile. "If there's something you want to know, why not ask me yourself?" Jake was taken aback but impressed by her confidence. He hesitated, then asked the question that had been on his mind. Are you a virgin? Samantha didn't flinch. She looked him straight in the eye and said, Yes, I am. If you don't believe me, we can take a test. Her honesty disarmed Jake. For the first time in his life, he felt like he had met someone he could trust. Jake was thrilled. He felt like he had finally found the woman he had been searching for. But little did he know, his journey with Samantha would be far more complicated than he could ever imagine. Jake's journey into church life started as a calculated effort to find the perfect wife, but it quickly turned into something more meaningful. He began attending services regularly, not just to observe Samantha but also to immerse himself in the peaceful atmosphere. For someone accustomed to the fast-paced, indulgent world of wealth and excess, the quiet humility of the church was a stark contrast. Samantha noticed Jake's growing involvement. At first, she had been skeptical of his intentions. After all, she had heard the murmurs among the congregation. Some said Jake was only there to find a wife, while others believed he was trying to cleanse his reputation. Samantha chose to reserve judgment, observing him from a distance. Jake wasn't used to being in an environment where his wealth didn't define him. In the church, no one cared about his expensive suits or the car he drove. Instead, people valued kindness, humility, and sincerity. Jake struggled with this at first. He wasn't sure how to fit in without flaunting his status. But over time he began to change. He volunteered for small tasks like setting up chairs for events or helping clean up after services. These simple acts of service humbled him in ways he didn't expect. Meanwhile, Jake's fascination with Samantha grew. She had a quiet grace that captivated him. Unlike the women he had pursued in the past, Samantha wasn't drawn to his wealth or charm. She was intelligent, kind, and deeply rooted in her faith. She carried herself with a confidence that came from knowing who she was and what she stood for. One evening, after a midweek prayer meeting, Jake found the courage to approach Samantha. She was sitting on a bench in the church garden, flipping through a worn Bible. The soft glow of the garden lights illuminated her face, making her look almost ethereal. "Hi," Jake said, his voice hesitant. "Mind if I sit?" Samantha looked up and smiled. "Not at all." They sat in silence for a moment, the cool evening breeze rustling the leaves around them. Jake felt uncharacteristically nervous. He wasn't used to feeling this way around women. "I've been meaning to thank you," he began. "You've inspired me more than you know. Coming here, getting to know this community. It's changed me." Samantha's smile widened. "That's kind of you to say. But real change comes from within, Jake. It's not about what others do. It's about what you choose to become." Her words struck a chord with him. Jake realized that Samantha wasn't just beautiful, she was wise. She had a way of seeing through people, understanding their hearts. He decided then and there that he wanted to be the kind of man she could respect. Their conversations grew more frequent after that night. They would talk after church events, discussing everything from the day's sermon to their personal beliefs and dreams. Jake found himself opening up to her in ways he never had with anyone else. He shared stories of his privileged but lonely childhood, his strained relationship with his parents, and his regrets about the way he had treated women in the past. Samantha listened without judgment. She appreciated Jake's honesty and saw potential in him. Beneath his polished exterior, she sensed a man who was searching for something real, something he had never been able to find in his world of luxury. As their bond deepened, Jake's feelings for Samantha grew stronger. He admired her integrity and the way she carried herself with quiet dignity. For the first time in his life, he felt a sense of purpose beyond his own desires. Samantha had ignited something in him, a desire to be better not just for her but for himself. One evening, after months of getting to know each other, Jake decided to take the next step. He invited Samantha to dinner at his home. He spent the entire day preparing, determined to make it special. The dining room was transformed with soft candlelight and a table set with elegant simplicity. Jake, who had never cooked a meal in his life, spent hours following a recipe to prepare Samantha's favorite dish. When Samantha arrived, she was both surprised and touched by the effort Jake had put in. As they sat down to eat, the atmosphere was warm and intimate. They talked and laughed, the conversation flowing effortlessly. For the first time, Jake felt completely at ease, like he didn't have to pretend to be anyone other than himself. As the evening drew to a close, Jake reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. His heart raced as he got down on one knee. "Samantha," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "you've changed my life in ways I never thought possible. You've shown me what it means to truly care for someone and to live with purpose. I know I'm not perfect, but I want to spend the rest of my life trying to be the best man I can be for you. Will you marry me?" Tears filled Samantha's eyes as she nodded. "Jake, I will." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of wedding preparations. Jake spared no expense, wanting their wedding to be a grand celebration. He invited all his friends and family, eager to share this new chapter of his life with them. Samantha's friends rallied around her, helping her plan every detail. Despite the excitement, Jake couldn't shake a lingering feeling of unease. He worried about his past catching up with him. He knew he had made mistakes, and the thought of Samantha finding out about them terrified him. He tried to push the thoughts aside, focusing instead on the joy of their upcoming wedding. Samantha too had her moments of doubt. While she believed in Jake's sincerity, she couldn't ignore the whispers about his past. She wondered if he was truly ready for the commitment of marriage or if he was simply chasing an idealized version of love. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw a man who was trying, really trying, to change. And she decided to take a leap of faith. As the wedding day approached, the excitement reached a fever pitch. Friends and family gathered from near and far, filling the air with laughter and anticipation. Jake and Samantha stood on the brink of a new beginning, unaware of the challenges that lay ahead. For now they were content to bask in the glow of their love, believing that together they could overcome anything. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear, with sunlight streaming through the large windows of Jake's family estate. The beautiful gardens were adorned with elegant white flowers, and rows of chairs lined the perfectly trimmed lawn. Everything was set for the grand celebration, a day that promised to be a spectacle of love and luxury. Jake stood in front of the mirror in his dressing room adjusting his tie. His best friend Mark leaned against the doorframe grinning. "You nervous?" Mark teased. Jake chuckled, though his hands betrayed him by trembling slightly. "Me? Nervous? Never. Just excited. It's a big day." Mark clapped him on the shoulder. "You're doing the right thing. Samantha's a great woman. You're lucky to have found her." Jake nodded, his mind drifting to Samantha. She was everything he had ever wanted, beautiful, kind, and virtuous. Yet deep down he couldn't shake a nagging feeling. Was he truly worthy of her? Would his past remain buried, or would it resurface to haunt him? Meanwhile, Samantha was in a nearby suite, surrounded by her bridesmaids. Her simple but elegant wedding gown hung on a mannequin, its delicate lace shimmering in the morning light. Samantha's best friend Clara helped her fasten her veil. "You look stunning," Clara said, stepping back to admire her work. Samantha smiled, though her expression was tinged with nervousness. "I hope this is the start of something beautiful," she said softly. "Jake has changed so much. I want to believe in him, in us." Clara squeezed her hand. "You're making the right choice. He loves you, Samantha. That's what matters." As the ceremony began, a hush fell over the gathered guests. Samantha walked down the aisle on her father's arm, her heart pounding in her chest. Jake stood at the altar, his eyes fixed on her. In that moment, all his doubts melted away. She was his future, and he was determined to be the man she deserved. The vows they exchanged were heartfelt, each word a promise to build a life together. As they said "I do" and shared their first kiss as husband and wife, the crowd erupted in applause. Jake's parents, usually reserved, beamed with pride. Friends and family toasted to their happiness during the lavish reception that followed. As the evening wore on, Jake and Samantha stole a quiet moment together under the stars. They sat on a bench in the garden, away from the noise and laughter of the party. "I can't believe we're finally married," Jake said, his voice filled with wonder. "You've made me the happiest man in the world." Samantha leaned her head on his shoulder. "And you've made me the happiest woman. I'm so glad we found each other." But even as they shared this tender moment, a shadow lingered in Samantha's mind. She had a secret, one she had kept hidden from Jake. It was a truth she feared might destroy everything if it ever came to light. For now, she resolved to push those thoughts aside and focus on their happiness. That night, as they returned to the honeymoon suite, Samantha prepared herself for what was to come. She had been planning for this moment for weeks, ever since Jake proposed. Her actions weighed heavily on her conscience, but she believed it was necessary to secure her future. While Jake freshened up in the bathroom, Samantha reached into her bag and retrieved a small vial of powder. Her hands shook as she poured it into his glass of wine, the fine white granules dissolving instantly. She placed the glass back on the table and tried to steady her breathing. When Jake returned, she handed him the wine with a smile. "To us," she said, raising her own glass. "To us," Jake echoed, taking a sip. He didn't notice the slight bitterness as he drained the glass, too caught up in the joy of the moment. Within minutes, the sedative took effect. Jake's eyelids grew heavy and he slumped onto the bed, unconscious. Samantha's heart raced as she sprang into action. She retrieved a small vial of animal blood she had hidden earlier and carefully poured it onto the bedsheets. She also dabbed some on her thighs, creating a convincing scene. Satisfied with her work, she climbed into bed beside Jake and pretended to sleep. Her mind was a whirlwind of emotions: guilt, fear, and determination. She hated deceiving Jake, but she couldn't risk him finding out the truth about her past. This was the only way to ensure he believed she was the virtuous woman he thought he had married. The next morning, Jake woke with a pounding headache. He groaned, sitting up in bed and rubbing his temples. "Good morning," Samantha said softly, feigning sleepiness. Jake smiled at her despite his discomfort. "Morning. I must have had too much to drink last night." As he looked around, his eyes fell on the blood-stained sheets. His expression softened and he reached out to take Samantha's hand. "Thank you," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "For saving yourself for me. It means more than I can put into words." Samantha forced a smile, her stomach twisting with guilt. "I told you I was waiting for the right person. I'm glad it was you." Jake kissed her hand, his love for her deepening. He felt a sense of pride and satisfaction, believing he had found the perfect wife. Little did he know that the foundation of their marriage was built on a carefully constructed lie. The days that followed were filled with happiness as they embarked on their honeymoon. Jake was attentive and affectionate, showering Samantha with love and devotion. But beneath the surface, cracks were beginning to form. Samantha's deception weighed heavily on her, and she couldn't help but wonder how long she could keep up the facade. For now, however, she resolved to focus on the present. She told herself that she had done what was necessary to protect their happiness. But deep down she knew the truth had a way of surfacing, and when it did, the consequences could be devastating. Life for Jake and Samantha after the wedding was a picture of perfection on the surface. Jake dove into his role as a devoted husband, balancing work and family with newfound purpose. He often surprised Samantha with thoughtful gestures, a bouquet of her favorite flowers, impromptu weekend getaways, or romantic dinners. Their social circle admired their relationship, describing it as a match made in heaven. But Samantha wasn't as carefree as she appeared. The secret she harbored from their wedding night gnawed at her. Every smile Jake gave her felt like a reminder of her deceit. She told herself that her actions were necessary, that Jake's love for her was genuine even if it was built on a falsehood. Yet the weight of her guilt grew heavier with each passing day. Things began to shift when Jake's old friend Ben returned to the city. Ben had been living abroad for years and hadn't seen Jake since their university days. When Jake learned of Ben's return, he was ecstatic. He invited Ben to a family gathering to introduce him to Samantha and the rest of his close-knit circle. The gathering was a grand affair held at Jake's family estate. Guests mingled in the sprawling gardens, sipping champagne and enjoying the late afternoon sunshine. Samantha moved through the crowd with practiced grace, greeting guests and exchanging pleasantries. She wore a serene smile, but inside she was a bundle of nerves. Social events always heightened her anxiety, as she feared someone might recognize her or know something about her past. When Jake introduced Samantha to Ben, her heart nearly stopped. The moment their eyes met, she knew that Ben recognized her. A flicker of shock crossed his face before he quickly composed himself. "Samantha, this is Ben," Jake said, oblivious to the tension. "One of my oldest friends. Ben, meet my wife." Ben's smile was polite but strained. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Samantha," he said, his tone measured. "Likewise," Samantha replied, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. As the evening wore on, Ben's demeanor grew increasingly curious. He watched Samantha from a distance, his expression unreadable. Samantha avoided his gaze, her mind racing. Did Ben know about her past? Would he say anything to Jake? The thought made her stomach churn. Later that night, Ben approached Jake while Samantha was speaking with another guest. "Jake, can I have a word?" Ben asked. "Of course," Jake replied, leading him to a quieter corner of the garden. "What's on your mind?" Ben hesitated, his expression conflicted. "I don't want to stir up trouble, but I couldn't help but notice something about Samantha." Jake frowned. "What do you mean?" "I'm fairly certain I know her from my time abroad," Ben said carefully. "She went by a different name, Melissa. She had a reputation for living a wayward life, often seen with different men at a time. She has a reputation for flirting around, and on more than 3 occasions she has been caught in bed with people's husbands. I don't want to say more, but I thought you should know." Jake's initial reaction was disbelief. "You must be mistaken. Samantha's nothing like that. She's honest, kind, and everything I've ever wanted." "I understand," Ben said, his tone gentle. "But I thought you deserved to hear it from someone who cares about you. Maybe I'm wrong, but I'd advise you to look into it." Jake's mind was a whirlwind of emotions as he rejoined the gathering. He couldn't shake the seed of doubt Ben had planted. That night, after the guests had left, Jake confronted Samantha. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice tense. Samantha's heart sank. She nodded, following him to the living room. They sat across from each other, the atmosphere heavy with unspoken tension. "Ben said something tonight," Jake began. "He claims he knows you from abroad. That you went by a different name and had a questionable past. Is there any truth to that?" Samantha's breath caught in her throat. She had anticipated this moment but wasn't prepared for it. She searched Jake's face, seeing both hurt and confusion in his eyes. "Jake, she began, her voice trembling. "There are things about my past I haven't told you. Not because I wanted to deceive you, but because I was afraid. Afraid you wouldn't understand, that you'd see me differently." Jake's jaw tightened. "So it's true? You lied to me." "I didn't lie," Samantha insisted. "I just didn't tell you everything. My past doesn't define who I am now. I've worked hard to become a better person, someone worthy of the life we've built together." Jake stood, pacing the room. "I don't understand. I thought I knew you, Samantha. I trusted you." Tears streamed down Samantha's face. "You do know me, Jake. The person I am today is real. Please don't let my past ruin what we have." Jake struggled to process the revelation. He felt betrayed, yet a part of him wanted to believe Samantha's words. He loved her deeply, but this new information had shaken the foundation of their relationship. "I need time," he said finally, his voice cold. "Time to figure out what this means for us." Samantha nodded, her heart breaking. "Take all the time you need. I'll wait for you, Jake. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." As Jake retreated to the guest room that night, Samantha sat alone in the living room, her mind racing. She knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but she was determined to fight for their marriage. She only hoped that Jake's love for her would be strong enough to withstand the truth. The days after Jake confronted Samantha were steeped in tension and uncertainty. Jake, overwhelmed by the revelation of Samantha's past, spent more and more time away from home. He buried himself in work, avoiding the pain and confusion that filled his heart. At home, Samantha lived in a constant state of anxiety, replaying their confrontation over and over in her mind. Her guilt weighed heavily on her, and she desperately wanted to make things right. One evening, Jake returned home later than usual. The house was eerily quiet, save for the faint clinking of dishes coming from the kitchen. As he stepped into the dining room, he was greeted by the sight of Samantha setting the table. She had prepared his favorite dishes: roasted lamb, mashed potatoes, and a warm apple pie for dessert. The aroma filled the air, tugging at something deep within him. "I made dinner," Samantha said softly, looking at him with hopeful eyes. Jake hesitated before nodding. He sat at the table, his face unreadable. Samantha served him in silence, her hands trembling slightly. As they ate, the tension in the room was palpable. The meal was delicious, but Jake barely tasted it. His thoughts were a whirlwind of emotions, torn between his love for Samantha and the betrayal he felt. After dinner, Samantha mustered her courage. "Jake, can we talk?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He looked at her for a moment before nodding. "Go ahead." Samantha took a deep breath, her heart pounding. "I know I've hurt you and I can't express how sorry I am. But please let me explain everything. You deserve to know the whole truth." Jake's eyes narrowed slightly, but he nodded again, signaling her to continue. Before I met you, my life was complicated, Samantha began. I was young, lost, and made a lot of mistakes. I used a different name, Melissa, and lived a life I'm not proud of. But when I came back here and found my faith, I left that life behind. Meeting you was a blessing, Jake. You made me want to be a better person, to live honestly. Jake's jaw tightened as he listened. Why didn't you tell me from the start? He asked, his voice filled with a mix of anger and sadness. Because I was scared, Samantha admitted, tears welling in her eyes. I was afraid you'd judge me, that you'd see me as the person I used to be, not the person I've become. I know I should have told you the truth, but I didn't want to lose you. Jake stood up and began pacing the room. Do you have any idea how much this hurts? I trusted you, Samantha. I thought I knew you. Samantha's tears spilled over, but she didn't look away. You do know me, Jake. The person I am now is real. My love for you is real. Please don't let my past ruin our future. Jake stopped pacing and looked at her, his expression conflicted. I need time to think, he said finally. I can't just forget this overnight. Samantha nodded, her voice trembling. Take all the time you need. I'll wait for you, Jake. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Over the next few weeks, Jake and Samantha's relationship remained strained. Jake avoided deep conversations and spent more time at the office or with friends. Samantha, meanwhile, threw herself into acts of service. She volunteered at their church, helped neighbors with errands, and became a pillar of support for those in need. Her actions spoke volumes about the person she had become, but Jake's heart was slow to heal. One evening, Jake decided to visit Ben. He needed clarity and he hoped Ben could provide it. Ben welcomed him warmly, though he could sense the turmoil Jake was going through. What's on your mind, Jake? Ben asked as they sat on his patio sipping coffee. Jake sighed. It's Samantha. Or Melissa as you knew her. I can't stop thinking about what you said. I feel like I don't know her at all. Ben nodded thoughtfully. Jake, I understand how you feel. But let me tell you something. People can change. When I knew Melissa, she was struggling, trying to find her way. But the woman I saw at your gathering isn't the same person I knew back then. She's changed, Jake. And from what I can see, she loves you deeply. Jake's brow furrowed. How can I trust her after everything? Trust is earned and it takes time, Ben replied. But ask yourself this. Has she given you any reason to doubt her since you've been together? Has she shown you the kind of person she is now? Jake was silent for a long moment. He thought about Samantha's efforts, her kindness, and the love they had shared. Slowly he began to see things in a new light. That night, Jake returned home with a renewed sense of purpose. He found Samantha in the living room, flipping through a photo album. She looked up as he entered, her eyes filled with apprehension. Can we talk? Jake asked, sitting down beside her. Samantha nodded, her heart pounding. I've been thinking a lot, Jake began. About us, about your past. And I've realized something. You're not the same person you were back then. You've grown and you've shown me that you're committed to this marriage. I can't let your past define our future. Tears streamed down Samantha's face as she listened. Jake, I promise you'll never have to doubt my love or my commitment to you. Thank you for giving me another chance. Jake took her hands in his. I love you, Samantha. And I'm willing to move forward. Together. But we need to be honest with each other from now on. No more secrets. No more secrets, Samantha agreed, her voice trembling with emotion. From that moment on, Jake and Samantha began rebuilding their relationship. It wasn't easy, but they were committed to making it work. They attended counseling sessions, deepened their faith, and supported each other in every way possible. Slowly but surely, the wounds of the past began to heal. Years later, as they sat on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard, Jake turned to Samantha and smiled. We've come a long way, haven't we? He said. Samantha nodded, her eyes shining with love. And I wouldn't trade it for anything,